Good evening again and welcome. I'd like to welcome Venerable Sila Ratana from Sri Lanka, who will be joining us this evening. And tonight, in our continuing series of talks on aspects of psychology as understood in Buddhism, we're going to talk about a problem that has become increasingly common in modern societies like Singapore and other developed countries, and that's the problem of depression. It seems that when you look at traditional cultures, traditional societies, they don't even have a word for this problem. That's not because in traditional cultures people didn't get down in the dumps sometimes. That's not because despair was unknown. But certainly it appears that it was not as common as it has become in most modern industrial societies. And in fact, so common has it become that companies that make antidepressants, Valium and things like this, if you really want to be assured of making a lot of money, put your money in a drug company, in shares in drug companies, particularly those that make drugs like Valium and what have you, because people have become so depressed, life has become apparently so meaningless to so many people that depression has become a major problem in most industrial cultures. Of course, depression was known at the time of the Buddha. They used to call it domanassa. Dukkha is physical and psychological suffering, and domanassa is sadness or depression. And we could say that there are three types. The first type we are not going to talk about because it has its origins in some malfunction of the brain. Some people, because of some malfunction in the brain, they are constantly depressed. And the only treatment for this is some form of drug therapy. So leaving that aside, there are two other manifestations of depression. There is what you might call occasional depression. And then there's what's called existential depression. So we'll have a look at the first of these for a while because it is really quite common. We all feel sad, we all grieve, we all feel down in the dumps, gloomy or depressed from time to time. And when we feel like this, there is a feeling of boredom, loss of interest, we feel sad, we may cry, and this may continue for some time, and then usually we get over it. This occasional depression can be caused by several things. One of the most common is the loss of, through death, of a loved one. Somebody very close to us dies, and we feel very depressed for a certain period of time. And it seems that there's a rationale behind this depression. For example, if somebody that we know and love has been very ill for a long period of time, and we've been expecting them to die, then it seems people feel grief for a short period of time, and then they recover from it. If somebody dies in ripe old age, 85, 90, 95, we feel for a short period of time sadness, and then we can generally get along with our lives. However, if two persons have just married for a few years and then one dies, or if parents have been bringing up their children and then one dies in an accident or unexpectedly, it's not uncommon for the parents or the siblings to experience long periods of grief. And in the case of parents, and particularly mothers, with the unexpected death of a child, the grief, the depression can last sometimes for many years. Sometimes we feel depressed because of failure, which leads to the feeling that we are in some way inadequate. This seems to be certainly a problem here in Singapore. And in societies like Singapore and Japan, where great stress is put on the importance of succeeding, particularly with young people. The type of pressure that people have to live under, quite often, only adults would be under that pressure in certain societies. So prior to exams, there's a great deal of anxiety. After the exams, depending on what the results are, there's either a feeling of elation, there's a feeling of relief, or sometimes there is depression, because one has failed to live up to one's expectations, there's fear of the future, and so one starts to feel depressed. People sometimes become extremely ashamed. They don't like to talk about their exam results. They feel very inadequate, and they suffer from depression. Another cause of depression, not as common in a society like this, but common enough, is a sense of loss in relation to success, or wealth, or fame, or youth. I have frequently come across people who have told me that until 1983, business was going well, everything was marvellous, and then they lost everything in 1983, 84, when there were problems in the economy in Singapore. So they lived in $1 million flat, now they live in a $500,000 flat. They used to have 5 cars, now they have 1. They used to send their kids to Raffles, now they send them to Outram Secondary. And as a result of that, they feel extremely depressed. There's still enough to eat and plenty to do, financially secure. But in terms of what they had before, they experience a sense of loss. They've come down in the world, as they would say. They lose their status, and that's related to it. It's a very interesting phenomenon in the world of theatre, and particularly in the world of cinema. You very frequently hear people complaining that at one time they were in the spotlight. They were given that strange name, a star. People chased after them. They wanted their autograph. There were articles about them in magazines, what they ate, what restaurants they went to, who they were going out with, what their next film was, etc. And then, due to changes in taste or whatever it happens to be, they're not as popular as they were, and they become obscure. And a lot of people find it very difficult to adjust to this. Having been famous and having had a lot of attention, they now find themselves obscure. Nobody chases after them for their autograph anymore, and they start to feel quite depressed. But perhaps the most common form of depression related to losing something is related to old age. When we're young, we have vigour and health and good looks. And then as we age, we lose all of these. They're taken from us. Now, most people adjust to this process quite well. But some people, particularly if they've had a great deal of vigour, if they've been exceptional sportsmen or women, or if they've been particularly good looking, they find it very difficult to reconcile the changes that are taking place in them. Old age tends to be looked at with a great deal of fear and anxiety. They become over-anxious about their health, their looks, etc. And of course, you can stave this off. You can stave off the results of aging for a given period of time. And nowadays with science you can even make it appear that you're much younger than you were before. You can have plastic surgery. You can put padding in here, there and everywhere. You can have injections. And you can look certainly somewhat younger, but you can't stave it off forever. And even the most optimistic person knows this. And so they start to become very depressed, anxious, worried, because they don't have the vigour, the health, or the looks that they had before. So all of these would be examples of depression that we have from time to time. They are related to certain events or certain circumstances. They arise because of some trauma that we've had to put up with. And in fact, Buddhism would say they are a natural part of living in the type of world that we do live in. According to the Buddha, there are 8 vicissitudes that characterize the human condition. These are called the Ataloka Dhammas, the 8 conditions of the world. Happiness and sadness, praise and blame, gain and loss, fame and obscurity. And if you look at ordinary human life, it is a play and an interplay of these things. We're famous, then we become obscure, then we may become famous again. We're wealthy, we may lose it all, we may get some of it back. There is a constant interplay of these 8 things. And because it is quite normal, natural, to want to be happy, to want to be praised, to rejoice in being praised, to like to have possessions, and to be popular and liked, because it's only natural, it is likewise natural that when we lose those things, we will go through a period of adjustment. And that is one of the characteristics of that period of adjustment is depression. We will feel sad, down in the dumps, gloomy. We will feel sorry for ourselves. So under normal circumstances, it is natural, it is understandable to have periods of depression from time to time. And we can cope with them because time heals all wounds. Eventually we get over it, we buck up, we cheer up, some happy circumstance comes along and we forget the difficulties we had and we're able to function. But that doesn't always happen. There is another type of depression which has become increasingly common, which we may call existential depression. This is when people suffer from depression for long periods of time, and it starts to affect the normal functioning of the ordinary human being. They become melancholic, gloomy, pessimistic. They come to suffer from what is called chronic depression. Now, there are certain reasons for this too. A great deal has been written on it. Doctors often are confronted by it, as are psychiatrists. There's been a lot of discussion on why it is that in societies that are affluent, relatively secure, where there's a great deal of opportunities, why is it there's so many people suffering from chronic depression? Well, the first cause of this, and one that is not always taken into account, is that it may be a result of a deep insight. If it is true, as the Buddha says, that existence is suffering, and if we come to see this deeply and truly, it may indeed make us feel very depressed. If it's true that loss follows from gain, and that sadness follows from happiness, and indeed that death is the end of life, then perhaps it is understandable that people become depressed. When they have a good, hard look at reality, it's understandable that they may feel depressed. And, of course, it is not only Buddhism that says that life is suffering. Perhaps the most beautiful book in the Bible, certainly the most neglected, is what is known as Ecclesiastes. This single book probably has more wisdom in it than all of the other books in the Bible.